Imagine for a moment, if you will, the United States in the present day. Imagine a bill reaches the U.S. House of Representatives called America, the nation-state of white people. In its basic principles, it states, the right to exercise national self-determination in the United States is unique to white people. Further down, a clause for white settlement. The state views the development of white settlement as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. Outraged, a coalition led by the Congressional Black Caucus initiates a challenge to the bill and proposes a bill of their own, where it calls the United States a country for all its citizens. But the Speaker of the House unilaterally disqualifies the bill before it's allowed to even be debated. Why? The House General Counsel explains in a statement, the bill includes several articles that are meant to alter the character of the United States from the nation-state of white people to a state in which there is equal status from the point of view of nationality for whites and people of color. The bill is dead. America, the nation-state of white people, passes through both chambers of Congress unchallenged. It's then signed into law. U.S. President Joe Biden would invoke the law in a tweet a year later saying, America is not a state of all its citizens. According to the nation-state law we passed, America is the nation-state of white people and not anyone else. As one rights group put it, there is no democratic constitution in the world that designates the constitutional identity of the state on racial grounds as serving one ethnic group. There is now. This disconcerting scenario is anything but. It's completely real and happened just a few years ago to little coverage and little condemnation. You've probably heard the phrase, Israel is an apartheid state. But what does that really mean? Apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning apartness. It was the name of a policy of racial discrimination and separation in South Africa, which lasted from the late 1940s into the 1990s. The UN General Assembly has condemned it as a crime against humanity since as far back as 1968. In 1973, the General Assembly adopted the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. Setting aside what should be a glaring omission, that is the occupied Palestinian territories, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank including East Jerusalem, no, for a moment let's discuss these slightly less than 2 million Palestinian Arabs who live in Israel proper. The story begins in 1948. 750,000 Arabs have vanished from what is now the State of Israel. With all of these Palestinians now gone, the State of Israel begins a campaign of systematic destruction of Palestinian homes through demolition and forestation, the planting of trees in villages, making them uninhabitable. In 2019, Haaretz reported on the practice using declassified Israeli documents. Whether the Palestinians were forced out or left on their own, no matter, the destruction of homes ensured that they had no place to come back to. In 1950, the State of Israel passed the Absentees Property Law, which the state used to claim all the land of all the Palestinians who had fled their homes as a result of the war, regardless of whether they fled to another country or were internally displaced. And to this day, they are still prohibited from accessing and using land and property that belonged to them or their families in 1948. From 1948 to 1966, the first 16 years of Israel's existence, Palestinians living in its borders were placed under military rule. The state used extraordinary emergency powers to confiscate property and close entire villages as military zones, confining Palestinians to dozens of enclaves. They were tried in military courts and required permits to leave their cordoned-off areas. They banned protests and political parties. You know, like the West Bank today. According to Haaretz, Israel lifted its military rule over the state's Arab community in 1966, only after ascertaining that its members could not return to the villages they had fled or been expelled from. By the time military rule was lifted, Israel had completed its initiative of destroying Palestinian homes and making them uninhabitable. The damage was done. Today, Arabs control just 3% of state land in Israel, despite making 20% of the population. Further, only 2% of industrial zones in Israel, which generate a significant tax income, are located in these Palestinian areas. But why don't they move? Unlike most industrialized countries, in Israel, the state controls 93% of the land, either directly or indirectly through quasi-national bodies such as the Jewish National Fund. In 2011, the Knesset passed the Communities Acceptance Law, which established admissions committees in Jewish communities to screen applicants based on their social suitability or their unsuitability to the community's social and cultural fabric. This vague wording enables discrimination, primarily against Arabs, but also against Mizrahi Jews, Ethiopian Israelis, or anyone whom residents of the privileged community fear will lower the value of their homes. Iran's Cooperative Association bylaws state an individual may be approved by the admissions if they meet the following qualifications: a Jewish Israeli citizen or permanent resident of Israel who observes the Torah and commandments according to Orthodox Jewish values. Today, admissions committees operate in 53 regional councils which control 81% of state land in Israel. Arabs are, in practice, barred from leasing land in 80% of the land in the state of Israel. A similar fate doubtless awaits the thousands of homes which are demolished in the south of Israel every year. Palestinians' right to political participation, according to Jerusalem-based human rights group B'Tselem, is under constant attack. In 2015, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sparked backlash for filming himself complaining about Arab voter turnout, saying that they were voting in droves. In a disturbing development, during the 2019 elections, Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party provided activists with some 1,200 cameras only in Arab communities. Jamel Baransi, deputy mayor of Reina, an Arab town in northern Israel, complained, "We noticed that each of these representatives had a camera on them, on their bodies, a move he believed was designed to intimidate voters." After the election, the PR firm behind the operation boasted on Facebook, "Thanks to the fact that our observers were placed in every Arab polling station, the percentage of voter turnout dropped to under 50%, the lowest seen in recent years." B'Tselem, in its list of methods in which Israel advances Jewish supremacy, includes immigration, noting that while any Jew in the world and his or her children, grandchildren, and spouses are entitled to immigrate to Israel at any time and receive Israeli citizenship, Palestinians living in other countries cannot immigrate to the area between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, even if they, their parents, or their grandparents were born and lived there. Desmond Tutu, the South African bishop, whose anti-apartheid activism earned him a Nobel Prize, would write in 2014, "I know firsthand that Israel has created an apartheid reality within its borders and through its occupation. The parallels to my own beloved South Africa are painfully stark indeed." If the Palestinians who live in Israel themselves are relegated to second-class citizenship and abused and persecuted against, one can only imagine just how dire and desperate the situation is for all the other domains, the West Bank and Gaza. It may feel convenient to omit the occupied territories, or perhaps it's implied that they're not Israel's responsibility, even though Israel's Supreme Court has itself ruled that the West Bank is indeed held by the State of Israel in belligerent occupation. The long arm of the state in the area is the military commander. It's more popular to say that Gaza is somehow free from Israeli control, even though it enforces what a UN report described as a medieval military blockade, controlling imports and exports, export taxes, the territorial waters and airspace, and has blocked the building of an airport and seaport. They control electricity lines, the underwater cable that phone calls are placed on, the network that provides internet, and the frequencies assigned to Palestinian cell phone companies. There's a reason Human Rights Watch, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations, and Israel's leading expert on international law, Professor Yoram Dinstein of Tel Aviv University, have all concluded that Gaza is occupied by Israel and is therefore responsible for its population and their well-being. Michael Link, Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian Territories, reported in 2022, Gaza had undergone a multi-decade process of de-development and de-industrialization, resulting in a 45% unemployment rate and 60% poverty rate, with 80% of the population dependent on some form of international assistance. As B'Tselem concludes, Israel has continued to control nearly every aspect of life in Gaza from outside. Despite this, outside of Israel's border, in all the land that Israel controls, not a single Palestinian can vote in Israeli elections. They have no political rights to speak of. In the West Bank, an Israeli Jew, or in fact a Jew from anywhere in the world, can live with full citizenship and benefits, while a Palestinian doesn't have citizenship. Israeli Jews go to civil court, while Palestinians go to military court, with an over 99% chance of being convicted. Palestinian political parties and demonstrations are illegal. Palestinians in the West Bank are governed by more than 1,800 military orders pertaining to taxation, transportation, land planning and zoning, natural resources, including water. Israel controls all the water going into the occupied territories. What was at the time lauded as an achievement for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the 1995 Oslo Agreement stipulated that 80% of water in the West Bank would be diverted for Israeli use, with only 20% for Palestinian use, despite the Israeli population numbering at over 100,000 and the Palestinian at well over 1 million. In a sickening provision, Oslo II provided Israelis with an unlimited water supply, while restricting Palestinian supply to a predetermined amount. West Bank residents will attempt to supplement their water on their own, but military orders prevent them from building any new water installation without first obtaining a virtually impossible to obtain permit from the Israeli army. They are not allowed to drill wells, install pumps, or even deepen existing wells, and are denied access to the Jordan River and freshwater springs. Israel even controls the collection of rainwater in most of the West Bank, and the Israeli army often destroys rainwater harvesting cisterns owned by Palestinian communities. Palestinians in the West Bank are also routinely murdered by soldiers and settlers with impunity. Palestinians further have been relegated to 165 islands, disconnected from one another through arbitrary roadblocks, which restrict their freedom of movement. Palestinians aren't allowed to build homes. They require permits that are virtually impossible to obtain, so they can't. And when Palestinians do build them, Israeli forces bulldoze them. These realities compelled UN Special Rapporteur Michael Link to imply that what's happening to the Palestinians doesn't only resemble the South African model, it's worse. There are pitiless features of the apartness rule by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory that were not practiced in southern Africa, such as segregated highways, high walls and extensive checkpoints, a barricaded population, missile strikes and tank shelling of a civilian population. In 2012, Amira Haas wrote for Haaretz an article confirming the existence of a so-called Red Lines document. The Red Lines document calculates the minimum number of calories needed by every age and gender group in Gaza, 2,279 calories per person per day. From this, they reduced the quantity of fruits and vegetables, milk, and meat and poultry. The idea is to put the Palestinians on a diet.
Israel is a democratic country. It's a rules-based country. It's a part of our broader Western family of nations.
Biden likes to say that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, but Israel is not a democracy, not by a long shot. In fact, it's one of the most undemocratic countries in the world. There are 5 million people living within the borders who do not have the right to vote over the government that determines virtually everything about their lives, and whose human rights under international law are unenforced and regularly violated. What is this called? Well, it's apartheid. Now, a lot of people get hung up on the apartheid analogy because when they think of apartheid in South Africa, they think of segregation and unequal rights among citizens. Yeah, you don't see, in Israel, you don't see water fountains that say Jews and non-Jews. You don't see people saying the front of the bus is for Jews and the back of the bus isn't. This is ignoring grand apartheid. Grand apartheid, both in South Africa and now, was the process of reshaping the territory. The idea was to forcibly remove the African population from the majority of the country, literally bulldozing their homes and putting them into trucks and then dumping them onto tiny chunks of land called Bantustans. Then you put a border around the Bantustan, give people citizenship, you call it, and give them a flag and a coat of arms and set up a parliament in the Bantustan. And you say, look, they have freedom. They have self-governance. It's their own thing. Taking this approach, ethnic cleansing, the apartheid regime shoved most of the African population into enclaves comprising just 13% of the land. And of course, it would be the least fertile land. It would be the land without the least resources. It would be the land with the least ability to thrive, the least water, etc. And then denied them any rights of citizenship within the white territory. White people justified this by saying Africans had rights in their own countries, the Bantustans. But of course, the Bantustans had no real power, no economic sovereignty. It'd be like locking 10 people in your basement and going, you guys, you're not allowed out of the basement, but you can pick your own government. You can pick your own leader. Whatever you find down in that basement, like rats and bugs and things, you can eat all of those you want. Like you have your own food source. Whatever water is dripping from the walls, that's all yours. If you come up with some sort of monetary system in the basement, you can have your own monetary system and your own economy. And so you're free. You have your own country. Israel has followed the grand apartheid playbook, chapter and verse. But Israel may say, no, Hamas controls Gaza. Well, Israel controls all the supplies that get in. They control the air. They control the water. They control both the clean water getting in and the water in the ocean around Gaza. Gazans aren't even allowed to go, pre-October 7th, aren't even allowed to go more than a mile out to sea to go fishing in their own sea area. They have medical supplies. Everything is controlled by Israel. So 6 million live as stateless refugees in other countries. 11 million are hived off, when you add the 6 and the 5, from the realm of rights within their own territory and denied the right to vote over the government that controls it. Minority rule by Zionists is declared democratic only because it excludes the majority of the population. There is no democracy within apartheid.
The word apartheid is exactly accurate. You know, this is an area that's occupied by two powers. They're not completely separated. The Palestinians can't even ride on the same roads that the Israelis have created or built in Palestinian territory. The Israelis never see a Palestinian except the Israeli soldiers. The Palestinians never see an Israeli except at a distance, except the Israeli soldiers. So within Palestinian territory, they're absolutely and totally separated, much worse than they were in South Africa, by the way. And the other thing is, the other definition of apartheid is one side dominates the other, and the Israelis completely dominate the life of the Palestinian people.
Why don't Americans know what you have seen?
Americans don't want to know.
Israel was constructed on the ruins of another society and by the mass dispossession of another people who remain unacknowledged as just sort of obscure natives in the background, back to the desert, let them go to one of the other Arab countries. That's been the position. And we bear no... The Oslo Accords say specifically that Israel bears no responsibility for the costs of the occupation. This after 20 years, 26 years of military occupation, no responsibility. As an Israeli journalist said, he said, we took over the country in 1948 from the British. The British left us the port of Haifa, a road system, an electrical system, a large number of municipal buildings, and lots of prisons. And we could build Israel. Without that, there would be no state today. If we had taken Palestine in 1948 the way we left Gaza for the Palestinians, there would be no Israel. We destroyed the economy. We deported most of the capable people. We forced the people to live in hovels and refugee camps over a period. I mean, anybody who's been to Gaza, it's one of the most criminal places on earth because of Israeli policy of occupation. And they bear no responsibility for it. I mean, that's simply unacceptable, even for the Jewish people who have suffered so much. It's unacceptable. You cannot continue to victimize somebody else just because you yourself were a victim once. There has to be a limit.